Welcome. This is the Public Affairs Forum sponsored by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. My name is Luther Elmore. We hold these public affairs forums on the second and third Sundays of every month. They're held in an effort to further the missions of this church, to nourish the mind and spirit, to serve social justice, to inform and inspire, and move us to social action. We've been holding these public affairs forums since 1954, the year this church was first incorporated. Where they're held on Sundays at noon, 4700 Grover Avenue in North Central Austin. We invite you to join us for these presentations live, where not only you can hear the speaker, but also ask questions of your own. Information about the forums are available on our church website, austinuu.org. Today we're happy to have with us Claudia Munoz from Grassroots Leadership. Grassroots Leadership is a social action agency based here in Austin. They deal in all kinds of issues relating to improving people's lives. And Claudia's specific focus is that she deals with the immigrant issue. She's the director of that program. We're very happy to have her with us today. If you'd welcome Claudia Munoz. Claudia.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here at First UU with so many of my friends. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I think the way in which stories are told is impacted by who's telling them. And so my name is Claudia Munoz. I was born and raised in Monterrey, Mexico, which is a city that's about 7 hours from here, from Austin. And I was actually raised there. I came to the United States when I was around 15 years old, went back, came back, and stayed here in Austin when I was around 16, 17. My 5 sisters live here in Austin as well, and my parents and my brothers remain behind in Mexico, and they still live there to this day. So we've been here for about 20 years now. I am undocumented because of the last time that I came here, I was already 16. I did not qualify for DACA, and so I was fully undocumented. The Fair Action Program did not cover me or most of my family members. And so that's what's been informing my life for a long time now. I attended Lanier High School. Now it has a different name. Back then it was Lanier High School. And I graduated from there in 2004. I was very fortunate that that school was very intentional and involved in the education of undocumented students. And so through my counselor and through other folks who worked at the school, I learned that I could actually attend college as an undocumented student here in Texas. And so I started getting very involved in the movement for undocumented students, for in-state tuition, for the right to attend college here in Texas and through the United States. And that's sort of how I started organizing around education issues and the DREAM Act. If you're familiar with the DREAM Act, it's a piece of legislation that never passed, but it would have given people a path to legalize their status at the national level. However, I was very fortunate that because I was here in Texas and I did attend high school here, I was able to attend college. It's one of my favorite things about myself. I actually was able to attend Prairie View A&M University, which is a historically black college that's right outside of Houston. And Prairie View really gave me an education that I don't know that I could have gotten anywhere else. I think as an undocumented person living here, it was always very hard to understand my place in this country. I wasn't sure if what I had to do to become an American, right? And I think one of the things that Prairie View taught me was that no matter what I did, there were going to be systems and forces that were not going to allow me to be an American unless I compromised a lot of my values, which is something that I was not willing to do. I studied a lot of social justice issues. I continued to be involved in immigration issues. And because I had to work as a waitress, making $2.13 an hour, I became really involved in the labor movement as well. And so I ended up actually becoming a labor organizer. That's my training. That's where I was trained as an organizer. For about 4 years, I worked for a labor organization where I was organizing fellow restaurant workers. However, in 2011, my whole life changed. I had continued organizing in immigration and labor and other issues, but in 2011, my nephew, who was like a little brother to me, was racially profiled in Williamson County and ended up in jail and then transferred to the Pearsall Detention Center. He got criminal charges, and so we knew that it was going to be really, really hard, nearly impossible to get him out of the hands of immigration. And this is 2011, so about 8 years ago, when all of these things that we hear about were not in the national spotlight as much as they are today. However, there was a group of youth that I knew that had been organizing for the rights of not only immigrants, but immigrants who had been criminalized, like my nephew. And my nephew had just turned 18 years old, and so he was very young. He had been in the United States since he was 5, and now he was at Pearsall Detention Center. We didn't know what to do right up until that point. All of our interactions with the immigration system were through the education lens, which is what I had been organizing around, and the labor lens. I was really lucky that I met so many people who supported us through that fight, and we were able to organize to get my nephew out of jail and then out of the detention center. And so at that point in 2011 is when I really had to start thinking of all of the intersections of not only immigration, education, and labor, but also the criminal justice system. And ever since, I've just been hooked on organizing more than anything on what we call crimmigration, right, which is the interaction between the criminal justice and the immigration systems. Really, it was then that I also started really paying attention to detention issues and to our local jail issues, right? How ICE was helping immigration deport our community. There's about 100,000 undocumented immigrants living here in Austin. We're about 10% of the population. Austin is roughly about 1 million people. A lot of people don't know that, but we're a really large percent of the Austin population. In 2011, after 2011, I decided that I wanted to focus more on detention and crimmigration issues. And so 2013, I was part of a group of people who infiltrated detention centers. Basically what that meant is that we turned ourselves in. It was people who did not qualify for DACA, we did not have papers, so we knew that we were going to be detained. So I was detained for about a month in a Michigan detention center, and the goal of that was to really organize from the inside. I knew the risk was that I was going to be put in deportation proceedings. To this day, I'm still in deportation proceedings. I have a court hearing coming up in November. But we really were just tired. We were tired of everything that we were seeing. We were tired of our families being detained and deported. And we decided that we were going to go inside of detention centers and organize from the inside out. After doing that, I was able to organize and help facilitate the public campaigns of some women who were later released through the public effort of many people. And as I kept learning more and more, I just really started thinking of systems, right? I knew that the way that immigration played out here in Texas was very different in how it played out in other states. And so really my mind started working and being wired into thinking about systems. Then later that year, 2013, early 2014, we said, well, we've organized entire detention centers and people are still getting deported. And mind you, this is all under President Obama. We know that his administration deported nearly 3 million people, and we should never forget that. No matter how bad things get under Disney administration, there were many, many people who were deported during those years, the Obama administration. So one of the things that we did was a campaign called Bring Them Home, and through that campaign, we found people that had been deported, and we said, you know what, you should have the right to come back to the United States to reunite with your family. There have been 3 million families who were separated under the Obama administration, and so we really started organizing to bring families back. And we did 3 rounds of that campaign to bring them home. And through the first round, actually, people from here self-deported in solidarity with the people who had been deported to use sort of like our public profile to help those people come back. And then here comes grassroots leadership. So 2 years ago, I was fortunate enough to start working with grassroots leadership. My family has lived in Austin for about 20 years. I've moved around a lot, but my family's always remained here. And when SB4 passed, right, SB4 is a law that really legalized racial profiling. There's no other way to put it. And when that happened, my family and many of our family friends were thinking of moving, of leaving the state. And there were actually a lot of families that I know, families that we grew up with, who ended up moving to other states that they saw as more immigrant-friendly, or that just moved back to their home countries. And so when my family was in the middle of that conversation, I was living in New York City, and I was already planning to move back, but I think, part of the reason that I was so invested into being here in Austin and in Texas was because I felt that we had already been pushed away from our home once, and it was horrible. It broke our hearts. I myself was separated from the opportunity to grow up with my mother and my brothers, and I just didn't think that it was fair that we had to move once again. And so I told my family, you know what, let's try to convince our family and friends to stay and fight back, and let's all of us stay and fight back. And my family, they're really amazing, and they were like, let's do it. Let's stay, let's claim our home. Texas is our home. We're not going to be living and going anywhere else. And so that's also when I took up the commitment to begin work in a grassroots leadership, where I have been for about 2 years. Grassroots leadership, really, we have two main programs. We have a criminal justice program and an immigration program. And I think Grassroots is an organization that's very unique in that way. It has existed for about 40 years. Next year is actually our 40th anniversary. And for a long time, they have actually been fighting at this intersection of criminal justice and immigration. And because of the story that I told you earlier, that was something that really, really, appealed to me. And so we, on the immigration side, which is the side that I oversee, we have two programs. We have the enforcement program, and we have the detention program. And we kind of broke it apart in that way because that's kind of like the way that the federal government also oversees immigration, right? You have enforcement, which is eyes every day on the streets, in the jails, everywhere, and you have the border, right? And then you have detention, and then detention is sort of like step 2 to enforcement. And so I really want to tell you a little bit about sort of this monster that we are fighting, right? Have folks here heard about the call to abolish ICE? Yes, okay. Can one or two people maybe just tell me what they think about the call to abolish ICE? Or what is that? What is it? Yes, I'll repeat. If you can just briefly tell me what you think of what is the call to abolish ICE?
Does someone want to respond to that? Richard Halpin.
Okay.
Thank you for your question. I think it's a nascent, started up grassroots movement across the United States to stop what is ostensibly a Gestapo operation that destroys family unity, that creates criminality where there is no criminality except the agents themselves who are breaking the law.
Yes.
Time and time again. It's a real tragedy in American history, I think, and the kind of behavior that the governors and the president's support is really a miscarriage of justice at the highest levels.
Definitely. So
people want to stop that. They want to say no, basta, no more of this.
Yep.
And place it with welcoming people who have made America great, the people who come here as immigrants.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes. So the call to abolish ICE is a recent movement, right, that has been calling for the abolishment of this agency of the United States government that is extremely complicit in separating families and detention and deportation. And I wanted us to think about that because ICE is one of many agencies that comprise the Department of Homeland Security, right? And I think a lot of people feel really nervous sometimes when we're calling for the abolishment of a government agency as ICE. And I do want to remind us that the Department of Homeland Security was created in 2002 after 9/11, so it hasn't existed for that long. And it was created with a very specific purpose in mind, right? After 9/11, there was a huge amount of prosecution of our Muslim brothers and sisters, and many other immigrant groups became scapegoats for what had happened on 9/11. And so this massive agency was created. The Department of Homeland Security, as it stands today, it's the umbrella of many other organizations, of many other entities and government agencies that we know, such as the CBP, so Customs and Border Patrol, ICE, USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and many others. DHS is actually the third most funded agency of all of 15 departments that we have in the United States. Their budget is $48 billion for this year, and for next year is a projected $90 billion. They have 240,000 employees. In comparison, the Department of Education has $69 billion and 4,000 employees, and the Department of Justice, which a lot of people think DHS and the Department of Justice are one of the same, they're not. The Department of Justice has a $28 billion budget. And so now we have a massive agency that's tasked with prosecuting, mainly is their main task with prosecuting immigrants, detaining and deporting people, that is about to have $90 billion at their disposal and 240,000 employees to do that massive operation, right? And so they, of course, cannot do this alone. They rely a lot on local law enforcement agencies to be able to carry out their work. I believe last year the numbers say that there were over 300,000 people who were actually apprehended by ICE, and of those, about 15% ended up in detention centers, right? And so when you think of the numbers, you realize that the more and more that ICE grows, that we allow it to grow, that we allow DHS to be funded, it should be really scary for us to think that as this administration moves towards more detention and towards denying the rights of more people, there could be a potential for over 300,000 people to be detained, right? Right now, there's about 53,000 people detained all around the United States, it's a massive number of people. And I will tell you a little bit more about what that looks like here in Texas and the such. But really, when we talk about detention, we have to think that the framework of detention and enforcement in this country really comes from punishment of people and profiteering, right? It's a system that's based on cruelty, on punishing people, and not really on helping people or helping people improve their own lives. And the immigration system is part of a larger system of mass incarceration that criminalizes people and really relies on locking people up for everything, right? From mental health to homelessness to addiction to poverty, you name it. Anytime that a human being is struggling, usually the call for the government to step in is for criminalization of those things. It's never for actual help. So as I mentioned, nationally, there's over 53,000 people detained only in ICE custody. But ICE is not the only entity that detains people. There's also CBP, Border Patrol. There's ORR, which is the entity that detains children, right? Anybody under 18 years goes to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And they also have detention centers for children, which they call shelters, but they're really, if you have ever visited one, they're really set up as a jail. There's the Bureau of Prisons and the Marshals. All together combined, they detain about 100,000 people. ORR, which is the one that I just mentioned, tasked with detaining children, there's about 16,000 children detained in those facilities in the United States. And these are facilities only tasked with detaining immigrants, right? We won't even talk about the problem with mass incarceration as a whole. This is just immigration. So we're talking about 100,000 human beings right now locked up in different facilities through the country as we speak. 53,000 of those here in Texas. Texas also has the highest number of detention centers. Here in Texas alone, we have 184 detention centers for adults and children. Massive number, if you think about it. And 71% of those detention beds are all owned by private companies, right? And the largest profiteers are CCA, which has rebranded itself as Core Civic, but originally is Corrections Corporation of America, and the GEO Group. And those are the two. 71% of all detention centers are operated and run by them. Of course, that means they get to profit from those detention centers. And so you think of the numbers, and I believe it's so, overwhelming, right? When I think about it, when I think the massive fight that we have ahead of us, it's part of the reason that I'm an organizer, right? We don't have money. I don't have $90 million in the bank like DHS does, and I never want to have that amount of money in the bank. But we have people, and we have people that care, and it's many more of us than of them, right? We just have to find each other. I do want to say also that Texas has more ICE contracts with law enforcement agencies than any other state. Right? And it's always really difficult. I think as Texans, we're very proud people. We're always really proud, right? Everywhere I go, I'm really proud of my state. I call myself a Texan, even though I was not born here. But on this side, on immigration, we have nothing to be proud of. We have all of the reasons to be embarrassed and ashamed of what's being done in our name. Here in Austin and the surrounding areas, right, we know that gentrification has pushed many immigrants to counties like Bastrop and Williamson, which are much more harsh with immigrants, right? In a county like Bastrop, not having a driver's license will automatically land you in jail, which will automatically land you in detention center and deportation proceedings. That doesn't happen always here in Austin, right? And here in Austin, there's more discretion to not arrest over not having a license. In other counties that have more strict agreements with ICE, no choice, right? And people are being forced to move there because of the increased prices in rent and owning homes that's happening here in Austin. And we also have the Hutto Detention Center, right? The Hutto Detention Center is a jail, an immigrant jail that sits in Taylor, Texas, which is in Williamson County. It originally was a state prison when it was first built. Horrible fun fact. T. Don Hutto is one of the founders of Corrections Corporations of America. He was born in Hutto, Texas. And the state prison, T. Don Hutto, was named after him. It was originally a state prison, and then it closed as a state prison. It reopened as the first family detention center in the United States. So back in 2006, when families were being detained, there's still two that remain open, but Hutto was the first one. Eventually, after national outcry, it closed in 2009, but it did reopen as the women's only detention center. So as we speak, there are over 500 women detained at the T. Don Hutto Detention Center. We at Grassroots have a visitation program, which has been going on. This is the 9th year that we have it, through which we match community members to visit with women who are detained. And we know that, the conditions are getting worse and worse. And so what we are seeing at the detention center is that women are not being given a chance to be released as much as before. In the lucky event that a woman gets a bond, we are seeing amounts of about over $7,000. Usually the average has been $7,500 to be released. And that's really, really a small amount of people that are allowed to be released. Many people, increasingly because of the many changes in national policy that we're seeing from the Trump administration, are being forced to stay detained for long periods of time. We have seen people that have been detained for many, many months. I believe the longest time that I have seen at Hutto is about 2 years, but in other detention centers, there's more than 2 years. I think the only good thing that we have is organizing, is each other. And we know that it works, right? We know that it works. We know that it's the only way to actually have local work that has national impact. That's the way that we see our work at Grassroots Leadership. And so I just want to tell you really briefly about three of the campaigns that we have recently worked on. The first one is the Shutdown Huddle campaign. So Shutdown Huddle campaign started actually last year when we were working on the campaign of a woman. As I mentioned, we have a visitation program, and through this visitation program, we visited with a woman that was sexually assaulted by a guard at the detention center. And through that campaign, our first ask was her release, right? There was no reason that anybody should be released, but especially somebody that had been sexually assaulted by a guard. And so that campaign really organically, in the minds of people, started growing into, well, what led to the attack? What led to the abuse? And really, when you start thinking about it, right, it's the fact that there's an imbalance of power, right? Guards will always have much more power in a detention setting over an immigrant who's detained there. And so the campaign for her release, which we eventually won, evolved into, let's just shut down this detention center, right? And of course, we believe that all detention centers should not exist, but we really wanted to start with Huddle because that's the community that we had been working with, the community that we knew. We were able to get the Williamson County Commissioners, miraculously, to end the contract that they had with ICE and Core Civic to run this detention center. They voted to end the contract last year in June. The contract officially ended January 31st of 2019. However, thank you. Unfortunately, ICE figure out how to continue having this place open. That place should have really closed the day that the community said, we don't want this to be done in our name, we don't want this to exist here in our community. What happened is that usually when you have a contract with the government and a private entity, you need a locality, right? And so the contract was between ICE, Core Civic, and Williamson County. Williamson County removes themselves, which means they needed another locality. And I said, you know what? We're just not going to do that. We're going to enter into a direct contract with Core Civic, which we believe it's illegal. We are still exploring the legality of it. One of the first hurdles that we have to clear is that nobody has seen this contract. ICE is refusing to give it to elected officials, state and federal. We have asked members of Congress to request it. They're refusing to give it to us. We filed a Freedom of Information request, refusing to give it to anybody. So really, nobody but ICE and Core Civic knows what this contract says, right? And I think the danger of that is that government agencies should be accountable to the community and to the taxpayers, right? And so as long as we don't know what's in this contract, we really don't know under which terms this private prison company and the government are operating this detention center. And so last week, we partnered with the UT Law School, and we actually sued on the FOIA to be able to obtain this contract from the federal government, because we believe that the more that we allow this to continue, the more that they will try to do that in other entities, which again removes all opportunities for local communities to get involved and to demand answers from them. The Shutdown Huddle campaign is still very much active. As I said, we just sued last week, and we meet regularly to talk about sort of how that looks, how that plays out locally. There is a group of formerly detained women that's being led now by Sulma Franco, who many of you know because she took sanctuary in this church. She works for Grassroots Leadership now, and she largely helps us lead our detention work as well, along with Bethany Carson. So Shutdown Huddle campaign. We also have, we've been supporting the Austin Sanctuary Network. I could not come here and not mention this, on the sanctuary campaigns, right? And we know Alirio, Hilda, and Ivan have been taking sanctuary for a while in Alirio, Her Staffers UU, and Hilda, St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. And they have been really, organizing for their freedom, fighting for their freedom. And one of the last things that we saw that happened was that Hilda was given a fine of over $300,000 as an act of retaliation from the federal government. And so we're very actively supporting the Austin Sanctuary Network, which is the lead organization fighting those campaigns. And I think the largest testament, right, to the success of those campaigns is that to this day, Hilda, Alirio, and Ivan are still here. Sure, they are in sanctuary, which, it's it's very difficult, but they're still here, right? Their very presence, I think, always reminds me that when you organize to stop a deportation, the presence of a person, the fact that they're still here with us, speaks to how strong our organizing is. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention really briefly is Freedom Cities. Freedom Cities was really an attempt to understand really deeply how law enforcement and immigration cooperate here in Austin. Freedom Cities passed last June, and part of Freedom Cities was not only to try to reduce the cooperation. We can't limit it because of as before, but we wanted to really understand how the Austin Police Department was helping ICE, right? How they were enabling ICE to deport, detain, and jail and deport our neighbors. And so we've been able to find a lot of really alarming information. Freedom Cities had a reporting requirement, and that meant that not only did ICE, did the Austin Police Department have to reduce the number of arrests, discretionary arrests, so instead of taking somebody to the jail, they can just give them a ticket. And they also had to inform an immigrant that they had the right to remain silent before asking them any questions about immigration status. Not only did it do that, it also required that every 3 months, the Austin Police Department issues reports to the city council to let us know how many times they collaborated with ICE, how they did it, and what the outcome and the impact was, right? And so through that, we have been learning that the Austin Police Department has been giving ICE school records, utility records, and many other really alarming things. In the first quarter, we found out that in about, I think, over 380 instances, the Austin Police Department turned over information to ICE about people living here in Austin. And so we're still working. Every 3 months, those reports come out. Those meetings are public. And the Austin Police Department has somebody there who's supposed to answer these questions, right, of how our money locally is helping fuel the deportation machine. And that has really given us a lot of opportunity to continue organizing, to inform the community of the rights, of when to remain silent. And it has been a really difficult time, but it also has been really beautiful because it has empowered the community with a lot of information about how to protect themselves against ICE here locally in Austin. And so those are some of like our latest campaigns. There are things that you can do if you want to get involved, right? The first one is for Spanish speakers. We do have the visitation program, and we do have a hotline. We do need people who speak Spanish for both of those because it's in direct contact and communication with the immigrant community, which largely speaks Spanish. We are seeing more languages now, so we will adjust the need. But right now, we're looking for Spanish speakers. We have the Shutdown HUDA campaign very active, and anybody can join that, especially if you live in Williamson County, but also here in Austin, there's many things that you can do. We do have an event called Dancing Away the Tension, and this is actually, I believe, the 9th year that we are going to do it. We have a bond fund through which we help bond women out. As I mentioned, the bonds are really, really high. We also pay for food, commissary food. We pay for travel. We pay for clothing for women who are recently released, and we help them pay for their bonds. And so we raise money through Dancing Away the Tension for our bond fund. Our yearly event will be October 20th at 6 p.m. at Flamingo Cantina, and the tickets are on sale on our social media. And that's the last thing, right? We publish everything we do in social media, and you can follow all of our events and everything we do through there. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And now, if you have questions, please raise your hands and identify yourself for questions for Ms. Munoz.
Thank you. I'm Jack DeLoach. Mm-hmm. I'm Jack DeLoach. The organization that you're talking about is totally a disaster. But I'm concerned also about what is happening to the children inside these detention centers.
Sure.
The isolation, the lack of contact with a mothering type, mm-hmm. or with their families gone, is guaranteed to produce the highest type of PTSD there is. And this is extremely difficult to stop once it's there. I don't think we have a really good program or even the knowledge for destroying the PTSD once it's there.
Yeah.
It's the stress that causes this.
Yeah.
The stress causes a methylation of the DNA molecule, and it is there for life.
Yep.
Unless we can get up with some kind of control. I don't think we even understand it. Most people are not aware of there is such a thing, probably.
Yeah.
But when these kids are released, if ever, back into the environment and the family environment, it's going to be very difficult to get rid of the TSD effects there.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for your comment. Yes, I mean, as somebody who myself in some ways was separated from my own mother, right, for many years, I totally understand. To this day, I have to attend weekly therapy to deal with the trauma of not being raised next to my mother. And yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't think we know the extent to which lives and generations are being destroyed, which we will also have to face at some point. I do believe, when you look at the numbers, again, there's about 16,000 of these children that are detained any given day, right? Historically, there's many, many more. So we're probably in the hundreds of thousands now of children whose lives are being destroyed, exactly as you mentioned. And I do think that we have to tackle the system as a whole, right? When we sort of make it okay for one group to be detained and not the other, what we do, and I saw this happen a lot under the Obama administration, right? When a lot of people were saying, protect the children, protect the dreamers. It's not their fault that they came to this country. And I believe what happened is created this dynamic that it continued fueling other parts of the system that are now being used against everybody, right? And so when you look at a really, the call to defund ICE should be the call to defund DHS, right? Because I think once you give money to any agency under that umbrella, it really weaponizes any really population that they want. And so we saw this happen last summer when the Trump administration wanted to make an example out of many people, and it enacted zero tolerance, right? And it's something that was in the books, but it was weaponized because they had the funding, they had the resources, and they could just do it. And so I completely agree with you. We talk a lot about what's our duty to the children, right? And of course, we need more funding for when they come out so that they have access to actual things, to education, to mental health, to other things for themselves and their families to be able to overcome some of these really horrible issues that are destroying their lives.
What substantive measures can we take to make the taxpayers aware of the enormous amounts of money that are being spent? Mm-hmm. Here they have this, as you say, this $90 billion budget. Mm-hmm. But how can we make taxpayers more fully aware of the enormous cost of this that's coming out of our pockets?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things is education, right? We have a lot of materials through our grassroots website and pages that we can show to people. I do think at the end of the day, and this is part of what grassroots does really well, that it localizes problems, right? I think when you think that you have to fight a department with $90 billion, it can become really overwhelming, right? But I think breaking it down to, well, what does that look like here locally? How much money is actually being spent here locally? Who is doing that here locally? And what that looks like gives people more of an opportunity to interact with these systems in a less terrifying way than like going to Washington, D.C. and saying, you have $90 billion, we don't have anything. I think definitely being in community, being aware of how that plays out. I mentioned Huddle. There are other detention centers within 2 hours of us, including some shelters for children in San Antonio. Really gives us a chance to get involved locally but have national impact on this work.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Sure.
Your journey has been remarkable and extraordinary.
Thank you.
We celebrate your courage and your beautiful way of articulating the story that you have to share. It's inspiring.
Thank you.
2 things. You mentioned that the Department of Health and Human Services has doubled their budget from 45 billion to 90 billion?
No, the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay.
Yes.
So first question is, and I'll just say both of the questions and sit down. First question is, that's a lot of money to double your budget in times like these. And what can you tell us about where that money is headed?
Well,
And second question is, would you tell us all again when this fundraiser that you're going to do is coming up and how people can get tickets and something more
most
about that?
definitely, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I don't know that I know for sure where the money's going. I have some guesses, right? I think a lot of that money is going to go towards the wall. But I think most of it is discretionary spending. The federal government has a lot of money that's for discretionary use. And it's really troublesome when a budget doubles that much, when you see how 40 billion have been used, even if you take this last year, right? If you see how it has been used, which is really to detain migrants, to strip asylum seekers from their rights, to detain children. I mean, you can only imagine that's going to just buff the systems even more, right? And so I think that's where it's headed, and I think that's the danger of it all, that the more that any of these departments, whether it's ICE or CBP or any of those, get this much money, it will be weaponized against migrants and vulnerable populations. I believe one of the largest increases in the agencies that will get money is Border Patrol. We saw that there's a massive call for hiring of new Border Patrol agents. I believe it's in the hundreds, if not the thousands, that they're calling to hire many more people. And so I think that's definitely where it's going. The fundraiser will be October 20th at Flamingo Cantina. The tickets in advance are $15, and you can get them through the Facebook page of Grassroots Leadership. Or you can visit grassrootsleadership.org as well. I do have sign-in sheets as well. If people want to give me their information, I'll make sure to stay in touch.
It seems to me that the anxiety against the immigrants is not as prevalent along for instance, the Texas border counties as elsewhere. How do we make people aware that those Texans who have had to deal with this issue for years and years and years, with Mexican nationals and others coming across the border, essentially have no problem with that? But the problem seems to be, in many people's minds, those people who are located far away from it and have no recognition of the problem. How do we get that message out, that there seems to be a disconnect between those two geographical regions?
I mean, there's a lot of border towns who are now self-organizing, who are extremely resilient. I can think of a few groups that do a lot of border work. I do think that the border crisis was created. It was not a real crisis, right? The only crisis was the many people who needed help who were not getting it. And so I believe that if you go down to the border today, what you really find is that those communities are trying to figure out ways to help their fellow human beings. The majority of people are not people organizing to keep the border closed, to build a wall. Like, that's not the majority of people. That's what the administration is telling you, but that's not the reality. There's many, many people who reach out to us from the border asking how to self-organize to help migrants. There's many people who self-organize to go, especially now that the administration is limiting the number of people that can claim asylum in this country. There's many communities that are self-organizing at the border to go into Mexico and help those migrants, right? Those camps that are developing along the border. And so I think really the disconnect is just sometimes we fail to recognize that those communities have been there for a long time, that they're resilient, that they're good human beings who have been weaponized, again, against this particular group of people who are immigrants. Yeah.
Claudia Munoz, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having
Thank you
me.
for your work with Grassroots Leadership, and thank you for your continued support for this group, that needs our help so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.